The following is a non-profit horror story narration. The story narrated with full permission and cooperation is written and owned by the author, who is credited in the subject line and in the description down below, along with a link to the original story. This video may contain some material such as violence, creepiness, jump scares, adult language, and suggested content which may not be suitable for some viewers. Please support the official release, and viewer discretion is advised.
Hurry up! Victor shouted as he turned to look back to his friends. Michelle and Brian staggering behind like usual, dragging their feet over the pavement as they laughed.
Slow down!
Michelle retorted as she motioned to Brian to match her speed. Victor was obviously excited, but Michelle was not sure exactly why. 4 weeks, all Victor could talk about was the abandoned tracks and how it would be great if they could just take a look. Brian, now catching up to Michelle, looks over and tries to start. Why are we...
Just come on, Slowpoke.
Michelle laughs back. Finally catching up with Victor, she starts to slow down. Brian, catching his breath. So what's so special about these tracks? Michelle, now a bit irritated as Victor had told this reason on several occasions, started.
Brian, the tracks have this whole mystery haunting behind them, and obviously, with that, why wouldn't we want to go?
Brian laughed at Michelle's response and nodded his head. You're right. I can't resist. The fall air outside was incredibly pleasant for this time of year. They finally reached the forest located on the outskirts of town and stopped walking. Victor turns to them. Are you ready? Michelle took a deep breath and answered.
I'm ready. You ready, Brian?
Brian investigated the forest, a little uneasy, and finally stammered back. Yeah. I'm ready. And they continued. The crunch of fall leaves could be heard as they rustled through the trees and bushes. Before long, they had finally reached the old bridge overlooking the river. Victor, with such joy, started running towards the bridge at full speed, yelling, I'm so glad we finally got to the bridge, then stopped in his tracks and turned around to the group. What if we see a ghost? His eyes got so wide as he said this and started to walk slowly backwards before turning around and waiting for the others to catch up. The sun was resting on the horizon now, and night was upon them. At this point, they were almost bumping into one another to stay on the path until Victor whispered, Hey, don't you guys have cell phones with flashlights? Michelle, starting to chuckle at this question, said,
Oh man, our cell phones!
Brian, feeling just as foolish, reached into his pocket as Michelle turned hers on to switch onto flashlight mode. After a while, Victor stopped them once the tracks were in view. Michelle, taken aback by the realization they had finally made it to their destination, let out a massive sigh. What now? Brian asked, looking around. Victor was now shown a smile so big from ear to ear that Michelle couldn't stop staring at it. She started to get this weird feeling of being in that spot before, but couldn't place why. Brian's heavy breathing could be heard a mile away as she reached a hand to Michelle's shoulder. Not expecting this, she jumped and turned to hit Brian on the arm.
Don't ever scare me like that!
Sorry! Brian smirked, and then pointed out. What's that? As she turned and raised her phone's light to see, there was a blur of something darting behind a bush next to a large tree. What the... Brian started, but stopped himself. My eyes must be playing tricks on me. He smirked, but Michelle seemed confused by all this.
You saw that too?
She stumbled to get the words out.
Come on!
She stated, walking over to the area, and Brian followed. Here were the train tracks they had been so excited to find. But against the tree was something Michelle could not take her focus from. What is it? Brian asked, holding his phone light up. Michelle, now at the tree, leaned over and picked up the item.
It's my bow.
She knew this from lifting the ribbon and seeing her initials printed on the inside loop. With that discovery, Michelle turned to head towards Brian, but slipped on the wet leaves nearby, causing her to fall back and hit her head. Brian rushed over to Michelle, bending down to check if she was okay. Suddenly, Victor appeared in front of Michelle, standing on the tracks, facing her.
Victor? What are you doing?
Victor? Brian looked towards the tracks. Michelle? Do you remember when we first came here? Oh yeah. You don't. Victor's tone started to twist from childish excitement to disappointment. But I promised myself.
I would make sure you did.
And with that, the train could be heard in the distance, riding the tracks towards them. Michelle, we need to go, Brian yelled as the rushing train became louder and louder. Pulling Michelle onto her feet, Brian started hurrying her over the tracks to get them far from the train, barreling towards them. Victor stood on the tracks, staring at Michelle, and as she turned to look back, the train was rushing past the spot they had been at, and Victor was nowhere in sight. After time had passed, trying to get back to the edge of the woods to go home, the streetlights started to show through the trees, but they both sighed in relief when they saw the black pavement and sidewalks. Michelle tried to stand on her own, and instantly started searching around with her eyes.
Where's Victor?
She yelled at Brian. Victor? Brian had a confused look on his face when she asked this.
Yes, Victor. The whole reason we went there was him. Stupid decision. We almost got hurt.
Brian's facial confusion turned to terror as he said, Michelle? Who's Victor?